Okay, so this recording is going to be covering Chapter 4, in which we talk about enterprise applications. One of the concepts we've been talking about is particularly with modern, as we call enterprise applications, is this concept of integration. One of the big areas folks like Porter and Hammer like, really homed in on is this idea that when you specialize in a particular area and ignore the whole, kind of the whole, basically things on an end-to-end processes, what you end up with is a suboptimal uh, result. Basically, you're not, uh, you have areas in which your connectivity is disrupted, the flow is disrupted. So this idea of integration, the ability to integrate things, processes on an end-to-end basis, so to optimize the end-to-end flow, is really an objective. All right. So there's the idea of what you want to be able to do is you want to have an application. If you look at a lot of your legacy environments, you'd enter information from one system, and then to get it to another system, you would manually enter it into the other system, so on and so forth. The idea is the focus is really on the ability to achieve performance improvements is really through this idea of integrating both forward and backwards, and establishing a central repository, having a one set of facts as the truth, as opposed to multiple sources of information, which then has to be reconciled against each other. There's a couple different ways to achieve this integration. So one approach is if you take your existing applications that are in place, you can take those and using a set of technologies, which usually we'll call refer to as middleware, link these things together so one system can talk to the other system. So as we see, the sales system can talk to the order entry system. Order entry can pass information to the order fulfillment system, and then down to the billing system. So you can achieve an end-to-end electronic communication. The problem is, though, a lot of times these integrations between different types of applications, because the applications are basically designed to with they have an internal consistency, internal architecture, internal structure, not necessarily designed to be integrated with. Some of these integrations, some of these use of middleware, sometimes becomes suboptimal. These interfaces can be brittle. Changes introduced in one system could actually make things break. Trying to maintain and sustain these things on an ongoing basis become very difficult for organizations. So this is a way. This is a way that it could be done, but in a lot of cases, organizations have chose really to go towards a system that was built from the ground up with to be integrated. So basically consisting of all integrated, having the ability to execute integrated business processes. The three main, when we talk about enterprise applications, the three main enterprise applications you want to remember are, starting from right to left, ERP systems, enterprise resource planning systems, which really are focused on all the activities of an organization. Customer relationship management, which is focused on communications and information flows about what customers are doing. And then third, the SCM, supply chain management, which is really focused in a similar fashion to all of the activities and integrations and interactions with all of the suppliers of an organization. If we look at what we mean by supply chain, it's really the end-to-end coordination of activities across multiple parties. So the idea of starting from what we would call the upstream side, which is kind of with the suppliers, kind of working through manufacturing, distribution, retail, and then into your customer, which is we call that that would be referred to as the downstream. Right? So the idea is that this SCM, supply chain management, is really focused on kind of the information flows between all of these different parties and coordinating activities. So there's really opportunities. I mean, this is something that that was inherent in what Porter was talking about, and also with what Hammer was talking about. This idea, if you can optimize performance, and in particular, supply chain performance, achieving both effectiveness and profitability, you're going to get organizations are going to discover there's real advantages within this. There's money to be made because, quite frankly, there's a lot of money invested, flowing through these supply chains, both in terms of inventory, in terms of cost of goods, the cost of goods sold, and then revenue on the inside. So the idea, if you can optimize that, you can take cost out of that, run that as efficiently and as leanly as possible. That would be an objective of an organization. So the three main links around supply chain, we're really kind of focused on three things. One is on the back end, material flows from suppliers. What you want to see is you want to have the materials are going to come from suppliers and be brought in to be processed as part of the manufacturing process. So that's kind of our first input piece. The middle piece, the transformation of those materials into products. Basically that's our, when we look at the value chain, the value add is actually the transformation from a raw material to a finished good, all the steps that are involved with that. And then third, the distribution of products to customers. All right. So all three of these have, their own dynamics. Obviously, material flow from suppliers. Ideally, you'd want to be able to minimize the amount of holding from a supplier perspective. You want to be able to get the material just when you need it and not before, to avoid all the holding costs. Obviously, within the transformation process, being able to achieve optimal performance, getting products right the first time, and making sure that all the steps are followed through on an end-to-end basis cleanly. And then on the distribution, being able to get material to customers as quickly as possible. So less holding of stuff, less holding of materials, either as a raw material or as a finished good, is desirable, because obviously the more velocity you get on either side of that, there's a financial benefit to be derived. One of the challenges within supply chains, because now if you look at what we're working with here, we kind of go back just a sec. This is really, what we're really exchanging back and forth here. Now, obviously, there's a product portion of it, but we're also exchanging information. All right, so this is kind of a transfer of product, of physical stuff, but it's also a transfer of information as we go through the end-to-end on the execution of the supply chain. One of the challenges you run into as you're going through this information flow is trying to make sure that the information you get is correct, because a lot of this stuff is done in an asynchronous fashion. A lot of this information flow occurs asynchronously. All right, so the information will be received, analyzed, and then decisions will be made based upon that information of how to proceed, especially as you're going through multiple parties. There's a concept in supply chain management, something called the bullwhip effect, in which a decision that is made, or an incorrect decision that is made, can have a ripple effect all through the other parties in the supply chain. So, for example, a shortage of raw materials, not having raw materials or having too much raw materials can have an impact as things would flow as you go into the different stages downstream, like with production, distribution, and ultimately down to the customer. The example is, I guess, one example was around the Dodge Viper. So the Viper example is Dodge, was making the Viper, had a whole series of cars. Had a whole bunch of green cars, right? And apparently the Dodge Viper the customers of Vipers didn't like green. So there was a whole bunch of green Vipers that were sitting on lots. So the information came back. So the idea would be is, okay, customers would be, that the company would buy those cars back. All right, so they would buy them off the lot, repaint them, and send them back out. The problem was that the information around the transfer of the Vipers back to the company was actually interpreted as sales. So what ended up happening was, from the manufacturing side, for the manufacturing planning side of things, the decision was made, well, we've got a very strong demand for green Vipers, so we ended up having green Vipers. So not only did they get the stuff that came back, but we got a whole new load of green vipers being distributed out. So this idea of a bullwhip effect really is, if you think of it as kind of a rolling impact, as information, as the impacts of decisions that are made at one end of the supply chain, kind of roll through the end. So a bad decision at one end, for example, a decision to cut back on raw materials storage, could potentially will have impacts down in production and distribution, because you're going to you might not be able to meet what you expect, what demand actually is versus what you thought it would be. If you're expecting a low demand and you got high demand, you'll see kind of these zigzag effects. That's hence the bullwhip, the concept of the bullwhip, kind of this ripple as you go from one end down the chain to the end, with the impact of each party affecting the other ones as it moves further downstream. So some of the advantages of supply chain management, and organizations have invested a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of resources into supply chain management. So the idea is an efficient system can enable you to really do a lot of things, and obviously control cost. It can also, though, if you look at the Porter's model, what a system gives you the ability to do is make decisions that can help you deal with forces that are out there, like, for example, buyer power and supplier power. The ability to effectively, not necessarily neutralize them or make them go away, but be able to manage them in such a fashion so to make them more, by aligning yourself with your suppliers in such a fashion so you can have you can create efficiencies between organizations, between operations. You can get some real advantages. The example would be, Walmart has arrangements with Coca-Cola where what they will do is they've actually have aligned the supply chain of Coke to the demands of Walmart, such that Walmart does not store Coca-Cola in warehouses. What they will do is actually they have arrangements where Coca-Cola will directly deliver product to the stores and put it directly onto the floor. So basically taking cost out. So tying, that enables Walmart. Actually it's mutual, because it's basically both from a supplier and a consumer perspective. Basically, both parties can benefit from that, and the way that's achieved, the way that's done, is through effective SCM. So there's a couple things, there's areas, and particularly of technology. So this whole idea of modern organizations, information technology really has been used to help optimize and reinvent supply chain. So there's a couple of examples out here. From a procurement perspective, we have purchasing, the ability to effectively buy, and respond quickly in terms of changes in demand, be able to be dynamic and flexible, both in terms of so we talk about procurement, we talk about logistics, we talk about materials management. So all three of these, there are technologies that kind of can be brought to play that can help optimize this. So a couple of examples that we're starting to see out there is, we call them disruptive technologies. Some may be a bit more disruptive or potentially disruptive downstream. So in the current, in our current world, we're starting to see this concept of 3D printer. 3D printer, mostly in manufacturing, but the idea of, the disruption would be this idea of a consumer 3D printing. So in other words, instead of manufacturing stuff at a warehouse or in a facility and then shipping it out, a consumer could purchase a product and then actually 3D print it at his site. So you could buy a pair of sneakers on Amazon and have them, instead of having them delivered a day later, could be delivered by could be 3D printed as you're sitting there. Radio frequency identification, being able to manage and track material as it moves throughout an organization. Walmart was very big into this in like the 2000-2001 time frame. We had put a big emphasis on this, and basically had mandated all of their participants in their supply chain, all their suppliers, would move to RFID. Had difficulties at the time because, quite frankly, the technology at the time was not capable of supporting this in a cost-effective fashion. But we're starting to see, the next generation or the next generation of RFID coming into play, and a lot of what was tried or had been thought of back like 15 years ago is now becoming a reality. Drones, a lot of talk about drones and logistics. You look at Amazon, you think about the Amazon delivery infrastructure. How many places they sell, how many places they have to deliver to, how many orders they deliver. If they can find a way to do that more efficiently. So the idea of drones as a potential, probably not 100% of the deliveries in Amazon will be delivered by drones, but there's probably a piece of that, a piece of their total, which could have the scenarios where it would be an advantage of using a drone, and we'll see how that plays out. And then robotics, different types of robotics particularly around materials management, material movements, inside of a warehouse, being able to basically optimize the movement of material and the material handling side of things. Customer relationships. So that's the second system we're talking about, CRM. Basically it's really focused on managing, capturing information regarding the customer's relationship to the company, with the objectives of increasing loyalty and hopefully profitability. So understanding the idea of being able to understand from a customer, what does a customer buy, how frequently do they buy, the volumes they buy, areas of kind of their activities and behaviors that can be then translated into decisions that could potentially influence customers. So the idea, by gaining insights into shopping and buying behaviors, you can establish strategies to better align yourself with what you believe your customer is going to be interested in. So the benefits, as we talk about, this idea of what we call RFL, stands for recency, frequency, monetary value. So the things you focus on: how recently a customer purchased items, the frequency of which a customer purchases items, and then the value. How much, what is the value? The combination of all of these three bits of information kind of establishes a profile of, kind of what, what the type of customer engagement and what would be an appropriate way of, maintaining and sustaining and building upon that. So the idea, in particular now, what we're seeing is, the power of the customer. Used to be just simply the customer would not, just wouldn't buy anymore from you. But now you've actually got, particularly in the world of social media, if a negative event could actually be translated into a viral video, which would have even more effects, even a broader effect, depending upon how it was received in either Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever the kind of social media is out there. So customers have even more potential forces to bring to bear on companies. So the challenge is also being able to balance, within the CRM realm, is also being able to manage, being able to, part of this is also managing the response of the customer and making sure that you are keeping, you're aware of of the potential of kind of this sorts of communications. The idea within CRM, kind of on the sales side, is there are key metrics you want to focus on. So you get metrics in sales, metrics in customer service, metrics in marketing. So the idea is you identify a set of, say 5 to 7 metrics, and then follow those and use those as kind of a baseline for guiding, decision making, and kind of how things move. So the idea would be, like in sales, would be maybe numbers of new customers, numbers of open leads, amounts of new revenue. These are the types of things you can, from a sales perspective, you can keep your finger on the pulse of. Customer service, service calls, you can identify, like, monitoring this and watching this, and get an idea of maybe an early warning of potential activities that might be coming down the line. For example, a some sort of flaw in a product, it can be detected by, certain behaviors. And then in marketing, the idea of the effectiveness of a marketing campaign, tying the outcomes, the results, against what the expected results would be for the investments in a particular marketing program. One of the focuses in CRM is really this idea of communication channels. So the idea is, the way you engage with customers, the way you communicate with customers, has really changed. Particularly over the past, say, 20, 30 years. It used to be, your customer engagement was really at the point of sale. You go to the store, the person goes to the counter, and that's the gate. That's the point of engagement. From a communication, would be advertising. Now what we're seeing is a much more focused. Those existing channels, those old channels, are still there, so they haven't gone away. But now we've got a whole range of other types of communication opportunities. Some of which would be effective in some situations, and other ones not. So it's not a matter of basically, okay, you have to do all of this stuff. It's a matter of trying to understand what are the most effective communication channels, and then focusing those depending upon specific customer requirements. So the information we derive from the CRM, that is captured and is and allows us to analyze the information, enables us to make decisions around what is the right communication channel to use, what is the appropriate communication channel, and to be able to focus resources rather than try to a broad brush kind of a shotgun approach. So CRM has actually been around a while, about 20 some odd years now. The first CRM systems started coming online in the end of the 90s, and it really has evolved quite a bit over the past over that time frame, over the past 20 years. So, for example, first generation was really focused quite a bit on like reporting, kind of tracking activities like sales activities, gathering the information, kind of then bringing it back and kind of looking at it and analyzing it. Kind of the first generation. This kind of moved into the next level, which was more of an analysis. So the ability to kind of take a deeper look, to not just simply reporting on information, but also kind of doing it, kind of looking for patterns and kind of analysis. So the ability to do things like, for example, segment customers, identify who are the best, who are the worst, who have the most potential. And the more information the more data we were able to collect, the more analysis, or the deeper analysis that could be performed. So we'll take for example like customer segmentation. Customer segmentation is not necessarily companies have been segmenting their customers for some period of time now. But now you have more dimensions and more points of information to use to kind of establish segments. So you can do more, more focused, more details. Whereas in some cases you would segment customers, in like either positive or negative fashion. Now what you can do is maybe take a look at some of the negatives and look for additional attributes or different things and gain insight to be able to maybe influence customers in another way. And then we're moving towards, trying to move towards this idea of predictions. As you get enough information, as we get enough data, which we then turn into information, which we then kind of review. The idea is ideally you'd like to be in a position where you can make predictions. So the challenge with predictions is making sure you've got as much information as possible, and then measuring, evaluating, the effectiveness of predictions. So there's nothing given. But however, as you get larger and larger sets of data, and you can do more and more analysis, the amount of your ability to predict certain outcomes becomes, you have a little bit more possibility, you have more capability to be able to do that. So the idea is that's actually, you use, for example, what would be a set of behaviors to look for, or a set of metrics to look for, which would identify customers that may be in risk of leaving. Would be an example, or would have the potential of expanding, their sales, their purchases, by some percentage. So things like that. These are all different things around CRM. So CRM has actually become a much more sophisticated because, quite frankly, as we've added things like, for example, social networks that provide, and both social networks and online, being able to interface with customers through websites. Tremendous amounts of information can be captured around activities and behaviors that really can be leveraged for advantage. So your traditional CRM is your kind of your transactional processing, kind of your application systems stuff. Analytical though is where you take that information, the information that's being generated by the operational side, and then being able to analyze it and be able to make decisions around stuff, being able to use the kind of the capabilities to analyze the data to be able to make decisions. Just kind of just a process flow. So the idea of your operational, your flow from an operational perspective is kind of your customer, is kind of the operational flow. And then once that's done, once this is in place, the information, each step along the way will generate information. And then there's also ongoing information around different types of sales, which then can be aggregated and looked at. So this was kind of the early, the sales department, Salesforce automation was kind of a first way of being able to identify performance, capturing data, which then could be driven into decision making. So, some of the stuff we talk about, with the analytical CRM, it's really around this idea of business intelligence and, analytics and data warehouses. With other, being able to look through data and really identify patterns. So, kind of the new trend now is not necessarily, delivering like a report upon what stuff you can, find readily, but actually trying to find patterns, unseen patterns, being able to analyze across, kind of do correlations of different kinds of work, different kinds of data to be able to find, identify things you didn't know before. So, we talk around, some of the different pieces here, customer segmentation. The other piece that's kind of interesting around this is, things we call website personalization. If you go back into the day, kind of old time general store, you had, you had a person who was basically familiar, the owner of the store was pretty much familiar with all of his customers on a name by name basis. So basically, he knew everybody personally. As things kind of scale up and you got to kind of moved away from the single proprietor and kind of like the stores and whatnot, basically the engagement was a little more, it really became separated. So, you really didn't, people would buy stuff, but you really didn't have a necessary understanding of people on an individual basis. What's been happening though is as we've moved more towards a website based, e-commerce platforms, information can be captured, data can be captured through that engagement, which can then be used to actually create a personalization, to gain insights of the person, kind of what they do, things they might be interested in, patterns of access. So all of these different things can be kind of assembled and turned into things that could be basically used to personalize the engagement on the website. So we've actually in some ways we've almost kind of come back to this being able to be a one-to-one relationship, but being able to do it at on massive scale, being able to do it scales of millions and billions of customers. So the third system we have is enterprise resource planning. And what ERP is really focused on is the integration of all of the operations and departments and functions of an organization into a single IT system. The objective, it can provide real-time views of what's happening across the enterprise, across different operations, across different views. So you get different views of how things are going, but also see it as a whole. Examples of some of the better known ERP systems. The one that's probably the best known one, SAP, which is actually U.S. headquarters is in Newtown Square. It's a German company. Really released their flagship product. Their flagship ERP product was released in I think '93 in the U.S. They've actually been in this business. Have been probably one of the largest organizations. Now they also have solutions within CRM and SCM, and so, But they're probably one of the better known ones. Oracle is another one. Some of the other ones we've identified here: Sage, NetSuite, Workday would be another one. So there's a number of different um, providers that have really developed these kind of large-scale solutions. It's really a significant investment, but what happens is it's a one of the things it helps do is provide an end-to-end visibility into what's happening in the organization. You know, by optimizing, in the older way of individual applications focused on individual functions, one of the problems is trying to transfer information on an end-to-end basis, from one application to the other was very problematic. So this really was a solution to how do you deal with all these different applications? Well, you collapse them into one. Also facilitates this idea of being able to do global information sharing and reporting. As organizations become international, become global in nature, the ability to effectively run a global operation is really these types of applications provide the ability to be able to do things like be able to operate in different currencies and operate in with different language sets, and be able to operate an entire global enterprise as a whole. And it also, the idea would be it avoids the pain and expense of fixing legacy systems and trying to integrate and maintain and sustain those sometimes brittle integration points. Just a picture here, basically, of what this is the before ERP. As you see, different departments. Each department could potentially have its own application or multiple applications. So, for example, with theoretically, we have one financial systems here. Another division or another group in the same organization could also have its own financial system. Right? So the idea would be is each one was kind of optimized, optimized for a particular function, but really sub-optimized as a whole. As we get into ERP, all this stuff is collapsed or consolidated into one pre-integrated system. So all of the different pieces, all of the different components, the functions of purchasing, finances, materials management, sales order processing, everything is combined into a single, a single application that's designed to be integrated out of the box. So the three most common attributes we see around CRP, the components that put in accounting, production, manufacturing, and human resources. Right, so those are kind of the three. There's other ones as well, so things like plant maintenance, other things depending upon the business. Some organizations will put an ERP system and only run accounting. Organizations will make that decision about what they want, how they would run that stuff. In addition, ERP systems can work with other applications, as we talked about. So we talked around supply chain management and CRM systems. These are different enterprise applications, so the three of them are implemented as separate, and also our business intelligence stack, our analytics stack. So all three of these become, we look at all of these as being enterprise types, enterprise applications. One of the things that was interesting about ERP systems, they're really hard to put in. A lot of times organizations, had started off with the expectation of a relatively simple software implementation, and discovered at the end that it was a pretty complicated undertaking with a lot of effort and a lot of cost associated with it. There were some pretty well known, some pretty well publicized ERP failures. So, for example, Hershey, Nike, Kmart, those were all, and there's other ones out there as well. You could actually Google ERP failures and get a whole list of different organizations that had difficulties implementing. And, in the ones that didn't fail, there was actually, they discovered that it was pretty hard. There were some real challenges within this. Right? A lot of times this stuff wasn't necessarily a software issue. It was as much of an organization change issue, and kind of changing roles in the organization, changing the culture of an organization, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on, kind of changing the way things work, putting organizations together, which really becomes, which can be problematic sometimes depending upon what you're moving from. A lot of organizations, it would say, well, the problem was with the ERP system, but when you look at it in the whole, it wasn't necessarily the ERP system. For example, Hershey had problems with their original implementation. They went back, They implemented on SAP ERP. They went back and re-implemented on SAP ERP, and they've been operating now like something like 20 plus years. So a lot of times you see with these ERP implementations, it's not the software; it's actually it's broader business issues that have to be dealt with. So idea of a balanced scorecard. So a measuring tool that some organizations have used is the idea of using a balanced approach to evaluate performance. So the idea of looking things across different dimensions like financial, processes, customer, growth, and establishing a series of different metrics and then looking at each of these and kind of evaluating each one. So the idea of it's not simply, you're not merely looking at financial, you're not looking at merely customer or processes, you're looking at all of them. So the key word on this is the concept of a balanced scorecard, having different components have to be addressed and dealt with. So the idea of an ERP, some of those architectures, most ERP systems historically were implemented as a single on-premise system. So which means you installed a system, one system in the organization that ran everything. And this has really been kind of the main deployment architecture for ERP systems. Now what we're seeing other types of newer technologies coming in, cloud technologies, things we're calling microservices, so you're seeing kind of a new generation of technologies kind of coming in and helping to kind of extend and kind of rework the architecture of ERP systems. But the reality is it's still the majority of ERP deployments are still pretty much single instance on-premise implementations, even though we will see, we're likely to see more utilization of cloud systems. So this is a monolithic, single package, large, complex, which is good, and it's also hard to work with sometimes. These, the complexities of these things and the integration of things are the types of things that really make these things, make the challenges around the implementations. These other, SOA, microservices are kind of newer techniques. They promise things like fast return on investment, low total cost of ownership. We'll see how this goes. We're still relatively early days in kind of this new technology window, but it's something to keep a watch on, something to see as this stuff matures over time.